Hello, fellow readers and readeresses. Today, we are looking back on the ancient past of the last 30 days and all the books I've been able to read during that time. Let's begin with the sexy part, the stats. So during the month of July, I have read 13 books with a total of 4,558 pages, which is honestly my best reading month so far in the year, and maybe not just this year. Split by genre, I have read 4 fantasy books, 2 sci-fi, 2 manga, 1 romantic suspense, 1 thriller, 1 classic / short stories, 1 graphic novel, and 1 nonfiction. And split by category, it's 7 adult books, 4 young adult books, and 2 middle grades. Mind you, the middle grades are a little bit iffy. They could also pass for young adult, but I mean, who cares? And I physically owned all of the books that I read besides the graphic novel which I read on script. One thing you will probably notice right away is that most of the books got very high ratings, and that is because I try to read only books that I think I will love, and I guess I know myself well enough. Now, enough fooling around. Let's dive in. I'm going to go through the books in the order in which I've read them. Starting with Heartbreaker by Julie Garwood. This is a romantic suspense novel and is the first book in the Buchanan-Reynard series, I believe. It follows Agent Nick Buchanan, who works for a very specialized department of the FBI finding missing children. Now, one day, his best friend, the priest Tommy something, gets a confession from a guy who claims he's going to commit another murder, and the next victim is going to be Tommy's sister. Naturally, Tommy calls his friend Nick, and the story goes from there. Now look, I know that this book is beyond cheesy, and I have no excuse for liking it besides the fact that I am as simple and basic as a bowl of plain white rice. But I mean, this book has everything. Bland, gorgeous protagonist chick who has a heart of gold and endless legs, and her name is Laurent. And no offense to any Laurents out there, I think it's a beautiful name. And a bland, brooding protagonist dude who's strong and big and wants to but just can't keep away from Laurent here. Psychopath on the loose who's trying to off one or both of them. We've got fake dating, forbidden love, nosy neighbors, small town drama. It's just good times. It was published in the early 2000s, and you can tell. But Julie Garwood is a great author who knows how to give a woman a good time and some very unrealistic expectations from men. Whoop-de-doo. I gave this one 3.5 stars. Next, I picked Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. This is a middle grade or young adult fantasy novel, and it tells the story of Sophie Hatter, who is a pretty average girl and the oldest daughter in the family. We follow her while she goes out looking for adventure, where she gets cursed by a witch, meets a wizard, finds a moving castle, and makes friends with all kinds of weird people and other creatures. This was simply magical. The world was beautiful. The characters were weird and very interesting. The magic system was insane, and yet I loved it all. The story took some very unexpected turns, I gotta be honest. Now, one thing I will say is that the romance was a little clunky, but given the age group that this was written for, I shouldn't be too critical, and I'm not gonna be. This made me feel like a kid again. Reading about this magical castle made me want to explore it for myself and all of its nooks and crannies, and most of all, I wanted to travel the grassy plains in it. Oh, and because I knew there was an anime based on this, though I haven't seen it, the whole time I was reading it, I was imagining it as though it was an anime, and that really helped to set the mood. It was simply adorable. I would highly recommend it to people with small kids and those who love whimsical adventure. I gave it 5 stars. After that, I picked up Fullmetal Alchemist Volume 1 by Hiromu Arakawa, and here I'm going to apologize preemptively about any unintentional name butchering I commit. I read this in French because this is the volume that I own, and even that didn't manage to ruin it. Just kidding, French people. It tells the story of 2 young brothers who are trying to bring their mother back to life using alchemy, during which process one of them loses 2 limbs and the other one his entire body. We follow them while they travel around. We have a little companion here. We follow them while they travel around and try to find ways to restore their bodies. Now, full disclosure, I have seen a few episodes of the animated series that was made based on this, so I wasn't wholly unfamiliar with the plot of the first few volumes. I just love this story. It's deep and dark and heartbreaking and strangely cozy, despite the occasional gratuitous violence. The world building is amazing and just makes me want to travel around and explore it for myself. But the best feature of this is the characters, and you'll probably hear me praise the characters of a lot of the books that I give high ratings to, because in my opinion, the characters are the most important thing about pretty much any story. But honestly, I loved pretty much every single one of them, and I would read a manga or a book about any of those characters, not just the main ones. Literally pretty much any character that's in here. Now, I'm not a manga expert by any stretch of the imagination. I have read less than a handful of those, but if my opinion counts for anything, I think this would be a good place to start. Naturally, I gave it 5 stars. And then I picked Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. This is an adult sci-fi novel and is the first book in the Expanse series. In this one, humanity has already conquered Mars and the asteroid belt and further planets, and space travel is no issue to anybody. We follow 2 points of view, one of which is a ship captain who with his crew are trying to survive, constantly being chased by forces they don't even understand themselves, and on the other hand, a sort of a washed-up detective who gets himself involved into a case of a missing girl and subsequently into a bigger conspiracy and way bigger trouble. And I will leave it at that because I wouldn't want to spoil it for you. I have a full review for this, both spoilery and spoiler-free. I will link it up here if you'd like to see it. So I will be very brief. I absolutely love this book. I think it's an amazing sci-fi, and if you haven't read it yet, you should. It's great. I gave it 5 stars. Next I picked Tripwire by Lee Child. This is book number 3 in the Jack Reacher series, which follows an ex-military cop, Jack Reacher, after an honorable discharge from the army. He roams the United States, taking odd jobs and investigating strange and often very dangerous situations. It's set in the late 90s and early 2000s. Now this is the cheesiest of cheese you can find out there, I admit it. And I know all the arguments, that it's written by a dude, for dudes, and is full of stereotypes, and so what? It's cozy and I like it. We have a pretty lady with blonde hair and long legs, which I have neither of, and a tall, tan, blonde, macho protagonist who's falling over himself trying to save her. There's also a ton of military talk and low tech that's considered high tech. I absolutely love this. And it's the 3rd book in the series, so I'm not going to say anything about the synopsis. I'm just going to say that I absolutely loved it. It has one of the vilest villains in the history of literature, and I couldn't wait to see him get it. If you consider that a spoiler, you don't know much about this series or the genre it occupies. Regardless, this series is very near and dear to me, regardless of the fact that I have never read these books before and I haven't even seen the movies based on them nor the TV show. It just feels safe and familiar, and if you can believe it, it helped me get over my flight phobia, which maybe I'll tell a story about one day. Anyway, I gave this one 4 stars and I can't wait to read the next one. And then I picked up Fullmetal Alchemist Volume 2. Unsurprisingly, after I finished the first volume, I wanted to pick up the second one, and I did. I read it again in French because, again, that is the volume that I have. Still, it didn't ruin it. Can't say much about the synopsis so as not to spoil you, but I'm just gonna say that this one got even darker and I loved it. Naturally, I gave it 5 stars. Next is The Snows of Kilimanjaro and Other Stories by Ernest Hemingway. This is a collection of short stories originally published in 1961. It would appear, though, that this beautiful edition that I own doesn't contain the same stories as the Wikipedia list shows. So I read this one and then the other ones on script. When I picked this, I was traveling, so I wanted something short to complete whilst on the road. Unfortunately, this ended up being a way bigger project than I initially anticipated, and the stories aren't a quick read, for sure, at least not for me. I took a lot of time to get through them and try to find the hidden meaning behind them, and maybe I am just not intellectual enough, but sadly, I found most of them to just be meaningless drivel. Most of it was just slice of life scenes with no beginning and no ending and no climax. And maybe if one is in a more introspective mood, one could find more meaning behind these, but I sadly couldn't. Though I did like The Snows of Kilimanjaro itself. I gave it 2.5 stars. And then I picked Preludes and Nectarines by Neil Gaiman and illustrators Sam Keith, Mike Drinderberg, Malcolm Jones III, and letterer Todd Klein, and colorist Daniel Vozo. Again, apologies for any name butchering I committed. Now, this is obviously a graphic novel and is a bind-up of volumes 1 through 8 from the Sandman series. It follows predominantly Dream, who gets himself imprisoned for 72 years by the order of the Ancient Mysteries. And so both the dream world and the real world get into a big trouble. And we additionally get to see a few other DC characters whose stories intertwine with that of Dream. Was I the only one who didn't know that this was a DC property? Now, there's one thing you need to know about me. I am a total wimp and I can't watch anything that is remotely scary or unsettling. Yet, I find myself enjoying all kinds of brutal and weird reads. I don't know why that is. Do you have that? Like being able to process way more disturbing information in a written form? Let me know. Anyway, I quite enjoyed this. I am new to graphic novels, so I'm not a big expert by any means, but I did quite like this. There is one specific volume in here, I can't remember the name, but it was set in a diner, and that was so messed up. I felt borderline nauseous. It was great, really. I highly recommend it if there's anyone left who hasn't read it yet, provided you can stand gore. I gave it 5 stars, though I have to be honest, the art style at times wasn't my favorite. Still, the story definitely deserves it. And then I picked Death by Black Hole and Other Cosmic Quandaries by Neil deGrasse Tyson. This is a nonfiction about space and astrophysics. It contains over 40 of the author's best essays on various topics, such as what it's like to fall into a black hole, how our universe was born, how the stars function, how radiation works, what the distant future holds, and how Hollywood likes to mess up cosmic representation. I love this one. It's one of those reads that kept me curious the whole time. It honestly took me back to my younger days when I was like 12 and I would go to the library and pick a whole bunch of encyclopedias, and then I would spend days just scouring through them and ingesting every piece of information I could find. It was such a pure bliss. And I don't know why I don't do that anymore. And the funniest thing is, I owned this book since 2015 when a friend of mine gifted it to me for my birthday. And here I am 7 years later, reading it finally. It's really a shame it took me so long to read it, but I guess it's better late than never. Though it was published all the way back in 2006, so it makes me wonder what kind of new wonders have been discovered since then. Naturally, I gave it 5 stars. And I know the author has a few other books published, so I will definitely check them out. And because reading Death by Black Hole inspired me, I was eager to pick up a sci-fi. Therefore, 2001, A Space Odyssey by Arthur C. Clarke. This is a classic in the sci-fi genre, and if you haven't read it yet, I'm very reluctant to give you a synopsis because I wouldn't want to spoil you in any way. I went into it blind, and I think that's the best way to do it. But in general, it follows a few different characters and revolves around a strange monolith that was found in a very strange place and baffled scientists. Now, I have read a ton of great books this year, but I'm wondering whether this one was the greatest of all of them. For sure, it's my favorite sci-fi to date. And probably nobody cares, but I used to be scared of this book, and the reason why is so stupid. I still am gonna share it. When I was a kid, I watched a part of the movie 2010, The Year We Make Contact, as the sequel to the first movie. For some reason, I had convinced myself that it was the first movie. I was like 10, okay? And it scared the living hell out of me. I couldn't even tell you why. I just remember the spinning ship and me being absolutely terrified. And so in my mind, I had made this book out to be a horror. And so many years later, I come to find out that I couldn't have been more wrong. The book is great, really. It's slowish in pace, but I read it within a day. I just couldn't put it down. It is so well written and so quotable, and had one of the most beautiful endings I can think of a book at all. Obviously, I gave it 5 stars. And last but not least, I picked Percy Jackson and the Sea of Monsters by Riordan. This is a young adult / middle grade fantasy based on Greek mythology and is the second book in the Percy Jackson series. It follows the 11-year-old Percy, who is half human, half god, and the son of Poseidon. He gets himself into all kinds of adventures alongside his friends, looking for relics, fighting monsters, and ultimately trying to save the world. This is a reread for me. Luckily, the first time I read it was all the way back when I first finished Harry Potter and was looking for something similar, so I had forgotten pretty much everything. I really like these books. Obviously, they're written for kids and it shows, but I love Riordan's writing and his reinterpretation of mythological entities and events. And these books are always a nice, relaxing read that doesn't require too much thinking whenever I'm in need of such. I gave this one 4 stars. Now, if you can do math, you know that there should be 2 more books in this summary. However, I read them for a secret long-term project, so you will get to see them in another video very soon. All in all, a great reading month, and I'm really looking forward to the next one. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time. Now, I know that everybody says, let me know in the comments down below, but I truly am curious about what you're reading, and if you have the time, I'd love to chat about it. And if not, that's okay too. I wish you all a great day and the most beautiful stories. Did you know that if you like this video and subscribe to this channel, you will live longer and therefore be able to read more books?